The great ship hung in the empty space between stars. Its name was the Harmonious Light. It was a beautiful ship, smooth and white and shining like a pearl. It was a ship of peace belonging to the galactic consensus. Inside were beings from many different worlds. They had gathered for a very important meeting. They were going to meet humans for the first time. Everyone in the galaxy had heard stories about humans. They came from a world they called Earth, a planet with wild weather and fierce animals. The stories said humans were tough, clever, and dangerous. Some species were nervous. Some were curious. All of them were watching the main screen. The Cthar commander, Vecnor, watched with cold, black eyes. His species was strong and warlike. They had thick, scaly skin and sharp teeth. He believed strength was the only thing that mattered. He looked around the room at the other delegates. There were the slender, insect-like Tichlin, and the furry, slow-moving Borley. He saw them as weak. He wondered if the humans would be weak, too. "They are here," a soft voice said. It was one of the Tichlin on the screen. A new ship appeared. It was the human ship, the Quiet Resolve. It was not beautiful. It was a block of gray metal, with sharp corners and no decoration. It looked like a simple tool. It did not shine. It moved slowly and carefully towards the Harmonious Light. It did not make a sound. It docked with the big ship with a soft, quiet click. Vecnor let out a low hiss. This was the famous human ship. It was ugly. It was unimpressive. He already felt disappointed. On the Harmonious Light, the main docking bay was full of delegates. They stood in a semicircle, waiting. The air was filled with the smells of different species and the soft sounds of their breathing. The large door of the airlock slid open with a quiet sigh. A group of 5 humans walked out. They were all dressed in the same simple, dark blue uniforms. They were shorter than Vecnor had expected. Their skin looked soft. They had no claws, no scales, no natural armor. They seemed very fragile. The human leader was a man named Captain Lee. He had short black hair and a calm face. He stepped forward and gave a small, polite bow. "I am Captain Lee," he said, his voice clear and steady. "On behalf of humanity, we thank you for this meeting. We come in peace." His words were translated for all the delegates. Vecnor listened, but he was not looking at Captain Lee. He was looking at the humans behind him. There were 3 males and 1 female. They all stood very still, their hands open and empty at their sides. Their eyes moved slowly, watching everything. The female human was named Sumin. She was shorter than the others. She had dark hair tied neatly behind her head. Her face was round and calm. Her eyes were large and brown, and they seemed to take in the whole room without any expression. She did not look strong. She did not look dangerous. She looked quiet, gentle. Even Vecnor dismissed her immediately. A creature like that could be no threat. He looked at the bigger human males. One of them, named Ji-hun, stood very straight. He had a strong jaw and watchful eyes. He was bigger than Sumin, but he also seemed very calm. The other male, a younger one named Quan, looked a little nervous. His eyes were wide. Captain Lee spoke again. "We are eager to learn about your cultures and to find a place for humanity within the galactic consensus." The head of the Borley delegation, a large furry creature, stepped forward. "We welcome you," it rumbled in a deep, friendly voice. "We hope for a peaceful future." The tour of the great ship began. The humans walked together, a tight, quiet group. They did not speak much. They listened. They looked. Sumin walked just behind Captain Lee and Ji-hun. She moved smoothly without a sound. Her soft-soled boots made no noise on the polished floor. Vecnor walked close to them, watching. He wanted to see a sign of their famous strength. He wanted to see something that proved the stories were true. They passed a viewing port that showed a field of stars. Sumin paused for just a moment to look. Her calm face did not change, but her eyes seemed to soften. She looked for a second, like someone who appreciated beauty. Vecnor saw this and sneered internally. She was sentimental, another sign of weakness. They were shown the ship's gardens, full of strange plants from many worlds. They were shown the libraries, where knowledge was stored in light and sound. The humans were polite. They asked simple, intelligent questions. They were respectful. But Vecnor grew more and more impatient. Where was the fire? Where was the power he had heard about? These humans were like the Borley, too calm, too peaceful. They were like quiet children in a room full of adults. He decided to test them. As they walked down a wide corridor, he stepped closer to the group. He made sure his large, scaly body brushed past the young human, Quan. It was not a hard push, but it was enough to show dominance. Quan stumbled slightly, a look of surprise on his face. He quickly regained his balance. But for a single moment, his eyes flashed with something hot. Anger. It was there and then it was gone, replaced by a controlled calm. But Vecnor had seen it. He thought, there is something there. A spark. He then looked at Sumin. She had seen the whole thing. Her eyes met Vecnor's for a brief second. There was no anger in them, no challenge. There was only a quiet, deep observation. It was like looking into a still, dark pool of water. You could not see the bottom. This unsettled Vecnor more than Quan's flash of anger. What was she thinking? He could not tell. He looked away first, feeling strangely irritated. The tour continued to the ship's engine room. It was a vast, open space, filled with the low hum of powerful machinery. In the center was the main reactor core, protected by a wall of clear, super-strong material. Behind the wall, a brilliant blue-white light pulsed with immense energy. This was the heart of the ship. The head engineer at Lin began to explain how the reactor worked. Captain Lee and Ji-hun listened closely. Sumin stood a few steps back, her hands still at her sides. She was not looking at the engineer. She was looking around the room. She looked at the doorways. She looked at the control panels. She looked at the positions of the consensus guards. She was noting everything. Vecnor watched her. He finally understood what she was doing. She was not a scientist. She was not a diplomat. She was a guard. She was assessing the room for threats, for exits, for advantages. This was a professional habit. So he thought, she is a warrior of some kind. But she was so small, so quiet. What kind of warrior could she be? He imagined her trying to fight one of his Kthar soldiers. The thought was almost funny. His soldier would break her in two. He decided that humans were not what the stories said. They were not monsters. They were not great warriors. They were just quiet. They were careful. They were polite. They were, in the end, disappointing. The first impression of humanity, for Commander Vecnor, was complete. They were harmless. The galaxy had nothing to fear from them. He felt sure of this as he looked at the small, calm face of Sumin. She was the picture of their weakness. He did not know he was wrong. He did not know that the quietest people are often the most dangerous. He did not know that the still waters run the deepest. He would learn, but by then it would be too late. The tour moved from the engine room into a long, curved corridor. The walls here were a soft, glowing white. Captain Lee walked beside the Borley delegate. Their conversation was quiet and friendly. The captain was asking about Borley art. He seemed genuinely interested. Behind them, Ji-hun and Sumin walked side by side. They did not speak. Their eyes continued to move. They noted the positions of every door, every air vent, every security panel. It was a habit, a necessary one. The young soldier, Quan, walked just behind them. He was still upset about Vecnor pushing him. His face was tight. His hands were curled into loose fists at his sides. He kept looking at the back of the Kthar commander. Ji-hun noticed this. He did not turn his head. He spoke in a voice so low only Quan could hear it. It was in their own language, Korean. Quan, relax your hands. Look forward. Quan flinched. He unclenched his fists. He forced himself to look at the back of Captain Lee's head, not at Vecnor. But the anger was still there. Hot in his chest, Sumin also heard Ji-hun's quiet command. She did not react. Her calm expression did not change. But her eyes, for a single moment, flicked towards Quan. She saw the tension in his neck. She saw the way he held his shoulders. She understood. The young ones always felt the insults the most deeply. It was a dangerous feeling. Vecnor saw the small exchange. He saw the young human tense up and then try to relax. He felt a surge of satisfaction. He had gotten a reaction. These humans could be provoked. They were not as calm as they pretended to be. He decided to push a little more. The group arrived at their next destination, the main reactor core viewing gallery. It was a large, circular room. One entire wall was a single, massive window made of thick, clear material. On the other side of the window was the ship's primary power source. It was a contained star, a raging ball of blue and white plasma. It was beautiful and terrifying. It pulsed with a light that made the room feel alive. The low hum of immense power vibrated through the floor. This is the heart of the harmonious light, the Lin engineer said, its voice full of pride. The containment field is the strongest in the galaxy. It is perfectly safe. The delegates spread out in the room, looking at the awesome sight. Captain Lee stood with the Borley, his face showing respect for the technology. Ji-hun and Sumin did not look at the reactor for long. They turned and looked back the way they had come. They looked at the single, large door they had entered through. They looked at the room's layout. It was a dead end. Only one way in or out. They did not like it. Vecnor saw their unease. He walked over to stand near Sumin. He was very close to her. He loomed over her small frame. "It is impressive, is it not?" Vecnor said, his voice a low rumble. "The power we can control. My people built the weapons that protect this ship. We understand true power. The power to destroy." Sumin did not look up at him. She kept her eyes on the reactor. "It is a great achievement," she said, her voice flat and calm. "Your ship, Vecnor continued, pushing. The quiet resolve. It has no visible weapons. Is that because you have no knowledge of such power? Or because you are afraid of it? This time, Sumin turned her head. She looked up at his face. Her dark eyes were still calm, but there was no fear in them. There was no anger. It was like looking at a deep, still lake. A tool is only as dangerous as the one who uses it, she said. Her voice was quiet, but every word was clear. Vecnor felt a flash of irritation. Her calm was infuriating. He was trying to intimidate her, and she was talking about tools. He was about to say something else, something sharper, when a sound broke the AI. It was a low, grinding screech of metal. Then, a deep, shuddering thump that came from the other side of the window. The beautiful, pulsing light of the reactor flickered. A wave of violent purple energy flashed across the surface of the contained star. The low hum of power suddenly became a high-pitched whine. A red light began to flash in the room. A loud, panicked voice spoke in the Tachelin language over the ship's communication system. The Tachelin engineer froze, its large eyes wide with terror. It chittered something fast and scared to the Borley delegate. A rupture, the Borley translated, its deep voice shaking. In the primary plasma conduit. The containment field is failing. Panic exploded in the room. The delegates started moving quickly, heading for the door. A core breach would vaporize the entire ship in seconds. Vecnor acted instantly. This was a crisis. This was what he was trained for. Security. To me, he barked. His two Kthar guards, who had been standing by the door, stepped forward, drawing their large plasma casters. But Captain Lee was also moving. Human team, fall back to the exit. Stick to the protocol, he commanded. His voice was loud and clear, cutting through the panic. Ji-hun and Sumin moved at once. They did not run. They turned together, a perfect unit, and began to move towards the large door, putting themselves between the reactor and the rest of the group. Quan was right behind them, his face pale but his movements sure. It was then that Vecnor made his decision. The humans were in the way. This was a perfect opportunity. A tragic accident during a crisis. No one would question it. He could test their mettle and remove a potential problem. As the group surged towards the door, he gave a sharp, silent signal to his guards. Just as Captain Lee and the Borley delegate reached the doorway, a loud, crashing sound filled the air. A heavy, metal blast door, hidden in the ceiling, slammed down. It came down fast and hard, right between the group. It separated them. On one side of the thick door in the corridor was Captain Lee, the Borley, the Tachelin, and most of the other delegates. They were safe on the other side. Trapped inside the reactor viewing gallery were Ji-hun, Sumin, Quan, and the human medic, Chai-won. And with them, on their side of the door, were Vecnor and his two armed Kthar guards. The room was sealed. The air began to smell of ozone and heat. The whine from the reactor grew louder. A small warning label on the wall began to glow with radiation symbols. Quan rushed to the blast door and slammed his hands against it. It was solid. It did not move. "Captain," he shouted. But his voice was swallowed by the noise. Ji-hun looked at the door, then at the reactor, then at Vecnor and his guards. His face was hard. He understood the situation immediately. They were trapped in a room with a failing reactor and 3 hostile aliens. Sumin had not moved from her spot. She stood perfectly still. Her head was tilted slightly, as if she was listening to something. Her eyes were fixed on Vecnor. Vecnor looked at the 3 humans and the medic. He looked at the flashing radiation warning. He made a show of checking his own wrist device. "A pity," he hissed, his voice full of false regret. He raised his plasma caster. It was not aimed at the humans. Not directly. He aimed it at the ceiling above their heads. "The radiation will kill you slowly. It is a painful way to die. Perhaps it is better this way. Quick end. A lesson must be taught about weakness in the galaxy." His finger tightened on the trigger. He never got to fire. The 10 seconds began. The air in the sealed room was hot and getting hotter. The scream of the dying reactor was a physical force pressing on their ears. The flashing red light painted everyone in strokes of emergency and panic. Quan was frozen by the blast door, his eyes wide with fear. Chai-won, the medic, had crouched low, her hands over her head. Ji-hun stood firm, his body tense, waiting for an order, a signal, anything. Vecnor's plasma caster was rising. He was going to bring the ceiling down on them. He called it mercy. It was murder. Then, everything changed. It started with a sound. Not a scream or a shout. It was a single, sharp word. A name. It came from Sumin. Yi. It was a command. A key turning in a lock. In the same instant, the calm, quiet woman who had stood beside Captain Lee vanished. The person who was there now was something else entirely. Her body dropped into a low crouch. Her muscles, which had seemed soft, were now coiled like steel springs. Her face, once so placid, was a mask of cold, empty focus. Her eyes were no longer deep pools. They were flat, hard, like chips of dark stone. All the humanity was gone from them. She was a weapon that had just been switched on. Ji-hun did not hesitate. He did not look at her. He did not question the command. He threw his body to the left, a fast and sharp movement. He cleared the space between Sumin and the Kthar guards. He made a path for her. Vecnor was still aiming at the ceiling. His brain was slow to understand. He saw the small human female move, but it was not a movement he recognized. It was not a dodge or a run. It was a blur, a streak of dark blue. She came forward, low to the ground, her movement impossibly fast and smooth. His finger tightened on the trigger. A bolt of sizzling green plasma shot from his weapon. It hit the spot on the ceiling where the humans had been standing a second before. Chunks of hot metal and debris rained down. But the humans were not there. Sumin was already under the blast. She had closed half the distance in the time it took for the plasma to travel. Her feet made no sound on the floor. She was a shadow. The two Kthar guards were trained soldiers. They were big and strong. But they were not prepared for this. They were not prepared for a target that moved faster than thought. The one on the right started to bring his own weapon down to aim at her. He never got the chance. Sumin reached him. She did not punch or kick him in the way of a brawler. Her right hand, with her fingers straight and tight like a spear, shot forward. It struck the guard's wrist, right where the scales met to hold his weapon. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The sound of bone and carapace breaking. The guard screamed. A harsh, guttural sound of shock and pain. His plasma caster clattered to the floor. She did not pause to see what she had done. Her body was already spinning. She used the stunned, injured guard as a pivot. Her left arm hooked his broken arm, and she used his own mass to swing her body around. Her leg swept out in a low, powerful arc. It connected with the ankles of the second guard. This guard was much heavier than her. It did not matter. Physics obeyed her. His feet were knocked out from under him. He fell backwards like a great tree, his head snapping back and hitting the hard floor with a heavy thud. The air rushed out of his lungs. The first guard was still screaming, clutching his shattered wrist. Sumin's spin continued. As she completed the turn, her hand, the same one that had broken the guard's wrist, snapped out. She did not look. She did not need to. Her fingers closed around the handle of the plasma caster that had fallen from the first guard's hand. It was a large, heavy weapon, made for a Kthar grip. It looked huge in her small hand, but she handled it without any trouble. Her arm came up, perfectly steady. She did not aim down the sight. She pointed it from the hip, her body aligned with the weapon. She fired twice. 2 quick, precise shots. Zum. 2 bolts of green energy hit the 2 guards on the floor. 1 bolt struck the chest of the guard with the broken wrist. The other hit the fallen guard in the shoulder. Their bodies convulsed once and then lay still. They were not dead. They were stunned. Unconscious. From the moment she had spoken Ji-hun's name to the moment the second guard went still, exactly 10 seconds had passed. The room was suddenly, strangely quiet. The reactor still whined. The red light still flashed. But the immediate fight was over. Sumin now stood directly in front of Vecnor. He had not moved. His weapon was still pointed at the ceiling where he had fired. His mouth was slightly open. His black eyes were wide with pure, unthinking shock. He could not process what he had just seen. The small, quiet human female was now standing a single step away from him. The stolen plasma caster was in her hand. She held it with a casual, expert grip. She raised her arm and pressed the hot muzzle of the weapon directly under his jaw. The metal was searingly hot against his scales. He could feel the power of the weapon humming against his skin. He knew that if she pulled the trigger, the plasma bolt would go up through his jaw and into his brain. It would be instant. He looked down into her eyes. The monster was still there. The flat, predator's eyes looked back at him. There was no anger, no hat, no excitement. There was only the job. He was a problem that had been solved. He was a threat that had been neutralized. The complete lack of emotion in her face was more terrifying than any battle rage. Her voice, when she spoke, was the same quiet tone she had used before, but now it was cold and sharp, like a piece of ice. "Your breach protocol," she said. "Engage it. Now." The hot metal of the plasma caster felt like a brand under Vecnor's jaw. He could not swallow. He could not breathe. His mind was a storm of confusion and fear. He had seen warriors. He had seen battles. He had never seen anything like the 10 seconds that had just passed. It was not a fight. It was a demolition. His 2 guards, his proud Kthar soldiers, lay on the floor like broken toys. They were not moving. The human female had not even been breathing hard. She had moved with the quiet, terrible efficiency of a machine built for one purpose. Her eyes held his. They were the worst part. There was no victory in them. No pride. They were empty. He was not a person to her in this moment. He was an object that needed to be managed. Your breach protocol, she repeated. Her voice still that same, calm, ice-cold tone. Engage it. Now. The words finally broke through his shock. The reactor. He had forgotten about the reactor. The high-pitched whine was a constant reminder that they were all about to die. The air was so hot it was getting hard to think. The flashing radiation symbol on the wall seemed to pulse in time with his racing heart. He had to do something. His pride was shattered. His authority was gone. But his will to live was very strong. He tried to speak. His voice was a dry croak. I need my communicator. Sumin's eyes flicked down for a fraction of a second to the device on his other wrist. She did not move the gun. Slowly, she said. Vecnor moved his left hand with extreme care. He was afraid that any sudden movement would make her pull the trigger. He pressed a button on his wrist communicator. A small light glowed. This is Commander Vecnor, he said, his voice trembling. He tried to make it sound strong, but it cracked. Authorization Vecnor 79er. Initiate emergency reactor containment. Full system override. Now. For a long moment, nothing happened. The whine continued. The heat built. Quan and Chai-Won watched, their faces pale with fear. Ji-hun had moved to stand near Sumin. His body turned to watch the blast door. His own hands empty but ready. Then, a new sound started. It was a deep, thrumming hum that grew louder and louder, drowning out the reactor's scream. The violent purple flashes on the other side of the window began to slow. The pulsing blue-white light started to steady. The high-pitched whine dropped in pitch, becoming the low, stable hum they had heard before. The red flashing light in the room stopped. It was replaced by a steady, calming blue light. The crisis was over. The silence that followed was heavy and thick. The only sound was the steady hum of the contained reactor and Vecnor's own ragged breathing. The voice of Captain Lee came through a small speaker next to the blast door. He sounded calm, but there was a hard edge to his voice.
Sergeant Kimo.
Stand down. Let him comply. Sumin did not look away from Vecnor. She did not lower the weapon. The threat is contained, Captain, she said, her voice clear and loud enough for the speaker to pick up. The immediate threat is contained, Captain Lee's voice corrected. Lower your weapon, Sergeant. Slowly, Sumin pulled the plasma caster away from Vecnor's jaw. She did not drop it. She held it loosely at her side, her finger resting along the barrel, not on the trigger. The monster in her eyes was receding, like a tide going out. But it was not gone. It was just waiting under the surface. Vecnor let out a shaky breath. He took a step back, his legs feeling weak. He looked at his two unconscious guards. He looked at the humans. Ji-hun was watching him with a neutral expression. Quan was staring at Sumin with a mix of awe and fear. The heavy blast door began to rise with a grinding sound. On the other side stood Captain Lee, the Borley delegate, and a squad of consensus security guards with their weapons drawn. The Borley's large eyes were wide. The security guards looked confused. They saw the two Kthar on the floor and the human female holding a Kthar weapon. Captain Lee stepped into the room. He ignored Vecnor. He looked first at Sumin, then at Ji-hun, then at Quan and Chai-Won. Report. Is anyone injured? No, sir, Ji-hun answered. We are unharmed. Captain Lee's eyes went to the two stunned Kthar guards. And them? Stunned, sir, Sumin said. Non-lethal setting. Captain Lee gave a single, slow nod. Then, and only then, did he turn to Vecnor. The Kthar commander was still trying to find his balance, both physically and in his mind. You? Vecnor sputtered, pointing a shaking claw at Sumin. She attacked us. She is a beast. A monster. Captain Lee's face was like stone. She is Sergeant Kim Sumin of the United Earth Marines. Her primary function is the protection of her unit and her delegation. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. You raised a weapon. You declared your intent to kill my people. She neutralized the threat. She did not kill your guards when she was fully justified in doing so. She then gave you the chance to save this ship and everyone on it, including yourself. He took a step closer to Vecnor. He was much shorter than the Kthar, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over him. You made a mistake, Commander, Captain Lee said, his voice low and dangerous. You mistook our quiet nature for weakness. You thought because we come in peace, we are not prepared for war. He gestured to Sumin, who now stood perfectly still, her face once again a calm mask. The monster was gone, hidden away. We are the most peaceful species you will ever meet. But we had to become the most dangerous ones, just to survive long enough to earn our peace. Remember that. The room was quiet now except for the steady hum of the reactor. The two Kthar guards on the floor began to groan and stir. Consensus security personnel moved in carefully. They checked the guards and helped them to their feet. The guards looked dazed and confused. The one with the broken wrist hissed in pain as he was moved. No one pointed a weapon at the humans. The scene was too strange. The humans stood calmly. Sumin had placed the stolen plasmacaster on the floor. She now stood with her hands at her sides, looking as quiet and unassuming as when she had first stepped off the ship. It was hard to believe she was the same person who had moved like a storm only moments before. Vecnor could not look at her. His pride was a broken thing. He felt the eyes of the other delegates on him. The Borley was watching him with a sad expression. The Tachlin looked afraid. He had to say something. He had to regain control. He pointed a claw at Sumin. His voice was a raw, angry scrape. You see? You all see? They are savages. They are violent. That thing is not a diplomat. It is a weapon they brought among us. Captain Lee did not raise his voice. He stood calmly, his hands clasped behind his back. She is a sergeant, he corrected, his tone even. Her role is protection. We were very clear in our communications. Our diplomatic teams include security personnel, just as yours do. He glanced at the Kthar guards being led away. The difference appears to be in the level of training. Vecnor's face flushed a darker shade of green. Training? That was not training. That was a frenzy. She moved like a wild animal. From the side of the room, Ji-hun spoke. His voice was calm, almost conversational. It was a strange contrast to the tension in the air. She is our close-quarters combat and threat neutralization specialist, he said. You pointed a weapon at her unit. You declared you would kill us. That was unwise. The simple, understated word, unwise, seemed to hang in the air. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, like saying fire is hot. Captain Lee nodded in agreement. We came quietly with open hands because we wish for peace. We still wish for peace. But we are not naive. Our history is a long story of conflict. We learn to hope for the best, but to prepare for the worst. He looked at Sumin, then back to Vecnor. We send our best diplomats, and we send our best monsters to protect them. You mistook our restraint for weakness. Vecnor felt the eyes of everyone in the room. They were not looking at him with respect. They were looking at him with pity. They saw a bully who had picked a fight with the smallest person in the room and had been utterly destroyed. The story would spread. The great commander Vecnor, defeated in 10 seconds by a human half his size. He tried to find more words. He wanted to argue about protocol, about the stress of the situation. But the truth was too clear. He had tried to kill them. She had stopped him without killing anyone. She had even given him the chance to save the ship. Her actions had been perfectly controlled. His had been reckless and murderous. The head of the Borley delegation stepped forward. Its deep, rumbling voice was gentle but firm. Commander Vecnor, it said, I think it would be best if you return to your quarters. We must speak with the medical team about your guards. And we must discuss this with the full consensus. It was a polite way of telling him he was dismissed. He was being removed. Vecnor's shoulders slumped. He had no more fight left in him. He gave one last, long look at Sumin. She met his gaze. There was no gloating in her eyes. No anger. There was only a quiet watchfulness. She was still assessing him. She was still on duty. He looked away, defeated. He turned and walked out of the viewing gallery, followed by 2 of the security personnel. The door hissed shut behind him. The room was silent again. The Borley turned to Captain Lee. Captain, on behalf of the consensus, I apologize. This is not the welcome you deserved. Captain Lee gave a small bow. Thank you. We understand that fear can make people act in strange ways. We hold no ill will towards the galactic consensus, only towards the actions of one individual. The Borley made a soft, approving sound. It then looked at Sumin. Sergeant Kim, your actions were remarkable. You saved lives today. You showed great control. Sumin bowed her head slightly. I was doing my job, sir. And what is your job exactly? The Borley asked. Its curiosity genuine. Sumin lifted her head. Her face was calm. To ensure the safety of my team, sir. By any means necessary. The simple statement sent a chill through the room. By any means necessary. They had all just seen what those means could be. It was a promise and a warning. All in one. Captain Lee gestured towards the door. I believe we have seen enough of the engine room for one day. Perhaps we could return to the meeting hall? We still have much to discuss about our future. As the group moved to leave, the other delegates gave the humans a wide berth. They looked at them with new eyes. They were not looking at quiet, weak creatures anymore. They were looking at people who held a terrifying storm inside them. A storm they could release in the blink of an eye. The humans had come quietly. But now everyone knew the truth. The quiet was just a choice. The meeting on the harmonious light continued, but the feeling in the room was completely different. The air, which had been light with curiosity before, was now thick with a new kind of tension. It was not a bad tension. It was the feeling you get when you are in a room with a powerful sleeping animal. You are not afraid it will hurt you, but you are very aware of its strength. The human delegation sat at the large, round table. Captain Lee, Ji-hun, Su-min, and the others. They looked the same as before. They were still calm. They were still polite. But no one saw them as weak anymore. When Captain Lee spoke about trade agreements, the other delegates listened carefully. When he talked about sharing scientific knowledge, they nodded with real interest. They were not just being polite now. They were treating the humans as equals. No, as more than equals. They were treating them with a new, deep respect. The story of what happened in the reactor room had spread through the ship like electricity. It was told in whispers in the corridors. It was discussed in quiet, worried tones in the dining halls. The details were unbelievable. A 10-second fight. 2 Kthar guards defeated. The commander disarmed and humiliated. And all of it done by the small, quiet human female. No one called the humans harmless now. The meeting ended with promises of future talks. The humans had been accepted into the galactic consensus. It was a great success, but it was a success built on a demonstration of terrifying power. Later, the human crew prepared to return to their ship, the Quiet Resolve. They walked back through the shining corridors of the harmonious light. The other species they passed did not just glance at them anymore. They stopped and watched them walk by. They looked at Su-min. Their eyes were wide. Some looked afraid. Some looked amazed. Su-min ignored them. She walked beside Ji-hun, her eyes forward, her face calm. She was the same person. The monster was put away, but everyone who saw her now knew it was there, just under the surface. They reached the airlock. Captain Lee turned and gave a final, polite bow to the Borley delegate and the others who had come to see them off. "We look forward to our next meeting," Captain Lee said. "As do we," the Borley rumbled. "The galaxy has become a much more interesting place." The humans stepped through the airlock and into their own ship. The door closed behind them with a solid, heavy sound. The silence on the Quiet Resolve was different. It was a comfortable, familiar silence. Captain Lee let out a long, slow breath. He turned to his team. He looked at each of them. His eyes finally rested on Su-min. "Sergeant Kim," he said, "your actions were necessary. They were also flawless. Well done." Su-min gave a small, sharp nod. "Thank you, sir." Ji-hun clapped her gently on the shoulder. "You were fast. I almost didn't get out of the way in time." A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of Su-min's mouth for a second. Then it was gone. The young soldier, Kwon, walked up to her. He looked down at the floor, then up at her. His face was full of emotion. "Sergeant, I'm sorry I was angry. I was not focused. You were amazing." Su-min looked at him. Her gaze was not cold now. It was the look of an older sister or a teacher. "Your anger is not wrong, Kwon, but you must control it. You must let it become focus. Not a fire, but a laser." Kwon swallowed hard and nodded. "I will remember." On the harmonious light, the Borley delegate stood with the Th-Lin engineer, looking at the screen that showed the human ship. "They are a puzzle," the Th-Lin said, its voice clicking softly. "They value peace, but they carry such violence within them." The Borley nodded its large, furry head. "It is not a puzzle. It is a lesson. They are what they are because of what they have survived. They do not want to fight, but they are better at it than anyone else. This makes them the most peaceful and the most dangerous people we have ever met." The Quiet Resolve began to move. It turned slowly away from the beautiful, shining consensus ship. Its engines glowed with a soft blue light. Then, with a silent, powerful surge, it shot forward into the dark space. It moved quickly and quietly. Just as it had arrived on the bridge of the Quiet Resolve, Captain Lee sat in his chair. He watched the stars streak by on the main screen. The first contact mission was a success. They had made allies. They had secured a future for humanity among the stars. But he knew the real success was simpler. They had come in peace. They had been tested. And they had shown the galaxy that humanity's quiet nature was not a weakness. It was a choice they made from a position of immense strength. He looked over at Su-min, who was sitting at her station, checking the ship systems. She looked peaceful. She looked gentle. He smiled to himself. The galaxy was now on notice. The humans had arrived. They would offer their hand in friendship. But woe to anyone who was foolish enough to try and break it.